Yeah, hi there. My name is Tim Schumacher. I'm originally not from Cologne, originally from Freiburg in southwest of Germany. Have moved to Cologne for my studies here. I studied at the University of Cologne. Studied business, but used to be coding a lot as a teenager, and then started my first company out of university when I was 23. A company called eyeo.com, a domain marketplace and domain advertising company. I ran that company as the CEO and co-founder for over 10 years. Lived in the United States for a couple of years, which was our biggest market. Took the company public, and then eventually sold it to United Internet. And since 2012, I've been doing a mix of angel investments, starting own companies again, and helping nurture the local startup environment. The company's mostly known kind of since 2012, where I've invested, or which I've started, one eyeo, the company behind the Adblock Plus, in which offices we also sit here. Also, people have heard about Ecosia, the green search engine. Then I've done a lot of like investments where I wasn't super hands-on, but things like Urban Sports Club, for example, the virtual fitness gym.
Yeah, we hear a lot about that in Berlin.
And Solar, the solar roof company, and a few others. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
Nice. So you came to Cologne to study, and
That's
then
correct.
so you set up eyeo in like your final year of studies, I think I read.
Yeah, that was my final year of studies. And I wrote my master thesis on the pricing on domain names, so I kind of combined some university credits with something I needed for my business anyway.
Okay. So did the idea come before the thesis, or is the thesis the catalyst of the idea?
The idea was before the thesis, and then
Okay.
I thought, okay, I gotta sit down for a couple months and write something, and then I better dedicate that time to something useful, and that's what I did.
So when you founded that, you could have gone back to Freiburg or to Berlin or to
Yeah.
Munich. Why did you stay in Cologne when you founded the business?
I definitely like Cologne. It's a very nice city. I think it has the right size, 1 million people. You get around quickly, but it's still a big city. People are very genuine and nice. That was kind of what brought me to Cologne in the first place. When I scouted for university cities, and I had a few on my list, Cologne just kind of caught me, the Cologne bug, and it was really about the people. And many people say that the Colonians are just a little more open and a little kind of more easygoing than other parts of the world, or other parts of Germany at least. And last but not least, it's very central in Europe. And as crazy as it sometimes sounds, it's like in Cologne, you're like, it's 2 hours to Brussels, to Amsterdam, 3 hours train to Paris. You sit in the middle of everything. Like Frankfurt is 55 hours away to the international airport. Berlin, for example, is a little bit off the beaten track. And also, like when I started my first company in 2001, Berlin was not as hot as it is today.
Oh, really?
To be frank, it was also a lot cheaper back then. You could, I don't know, get an office space for €5 per square meter, and now it's more approaching 50. But it was not that everybody just flocked to Berlin as it is right now.
I'm surprised by that. I just thought Berlin had always been the place to be. So I talk to lots of people outside of Germany who know Berlin and know Munich. They've got friends there, they've visited there. But to someone who has never maybe even heard of Cologne City before, you described a little bit about the culture and the people here, but how would you describe Cologne to someone that has never visited?
So I would start by saying Cologne is not pretty, but it's very lovable. Like if people come into Cologne, the first thing is you recognize the dome, and that's actually, Cologne gets more tourist visitors than any other city in Germany. And because like it's so central and a lot of buses just go through, go into the dome, take some pictures and continue. And the dome really kind of stands out. The rest of the city has been quite destroyed, so and not necessarily be so well built up after the Second World War. So the city is more kind of, as I said, more lovable than it is pretty. But then really what stands out is really it's also a very young city. Cologne has the biggest university in all of Germany, the most students compared to per capita. And so the city is quite young, and you see that. And yeah, also it is quite international. It's the Netherlands are just 1 hour away. Belgium is equally close. France a little further, but also so it sits kind of very internationally in the center of Europe, and you can certainly feel that in the city.
I was wondering if this rivalry I read about between Cologne and Dusseldorf before I came here was a real thing. Is there like an actual rivalry between the cities? Like
what is Dusseldorf?
That's yes. Does that affect like business, or is it just
No, that's just
like a sports
I think
thing?
it's a sports thing, and people make fun of it. I know a lot of good people in Dusseldorf, and I actually would argue Dusseldorf is a little similar. It's also
that's what I
also
thought.
Rhineland type, but it's more kind of this sports rivalry.
Yeah,
like same goes for Bayern Leverkusen or Gladbach or something.
Yeah,
in football or something.
I felt that when I went to Dusseldorf for the first time. I didn't feel it was drastically different, but I heard that, you know, big rivalry, but doesn't affect business, doesn't affect people. So as an investor and a business owner, have you noticed any benefits of Cologne's location? Geographically?
Absolutely. Well, geographically, it's clearly better than many other cities in Germany because of the proximity to like really everything in Europe. Like, again, London, for example, I can do 4 hours train or really quick plane, of course, as well. But I can get to places a lot better than. Also, the region is densely populated here. It's Düsseldorf, as you said, in the north, Bonn, the whole Rhine-Ruhr area. So there are many more people living there than, for example, within the broader range of Berlin or Munich, and that, for example, means we have a lot of airports here, a lot of train connections. It's not the best for like nature lovers. I think, like, for example, Munich has an edge there, or Hamburg when you think of the water. But it definitely, for business, it has a clear advantage, and it's noticeable. The other two advantages I would say these days are really cost-wise. It's been quite effective for us. Like we rent here offices in Cologne, anything between, if it's not super fancy, startups usually shouldn't have super fancy offices, but so any of the stuff we rent here is anywhere between 10 and 15 euros per square meter normally. You don't get anything in Berlin unless you know you move out way into the suburbs these days. And Munich and Hamburg are also more expensive. And last but not least, I would say I would say the churn among employees is lower here. In Berlin, for example, I see fierce competition, and it's good if you have a recruiting company, but as an employer, you want people to stay around for a little longer, and I see a very fierce competition in Berlin for top talent, much more than I'd see that in Cologne. There's much more stability in our organization here, but also at other companies I have in Cologne than in Berlin.
Yeah, I absolutely noticed that. And I wonder if that's a reflection of something else I want to ask you about, actually. It's this, I'm not an investor, so I can't, this is only a perception, and I could be wrong, but if I compare the startup community in Cologne to what I see and hear in Berlin, Berlin seems to be quite volatile. There's lots of high growth, high investment, big explosions in headcount, and lots of businesses that suddenly disappear. I don't see that in Cologne. It seems Cologne is maybe a more reserved place to build a startup. I don't want to offend anyone in Berlin, but it seems like Cologne businesses are more focused on business, profitability, sustainability, building something robust. But is that an accurate perception? Is there a real difference in attitudes?
I think the perception is correct. There's definitely, for better or worse, there is more of an aggressiveness in Berlin. So we have to give Berlin credit. The two top-notch or two or three top-notch businesses, like really world-class businesses they've built, they were all from Berlin, not from Cologne. But also I see a lot more hot air in startup pitches in Berlin. People are better, I think, sometimes at pitching. And Cologne, I see some really good startups and scale-ups where people haven't heard about them for a long time. Like to mention two, maybe Clever Bridge is a software company, a software platform, or Open Exchange or OX. Two are really kind of world-class companies no one has ever heard of. Both of them have more than 400 employees, headquartered in Cologne. Nobody knows them, and they are both kind of in a more B2B, behind-the-scenes type business model, and that is quite typical of here.
Yeah, I sensed that might be the case. More of the startups here are behind the scenes, is a good way of putting it. They are businesses that are kind of starting up a service or a product for other businesses, infrastructure, giant swarm. Yeah. Whereas Berlin, there's lots of like consumer-focused product startups. So is there in Cologne a domain that is more present in startups? Like, does Cologne have lots of e-commerce startups or lots of B2B startups, or is it fairly spread?
I think it's fairly spread. I don't see a theme, except if it would be a little bit more B2B than Berlin, certainly. But also, for example, Munich has more B2B than Berlin. I think everybody has more B2B than Berlin. Yeah. Sometimes also city officials and the people who are tasked at the city for building a startup ecosystem, they've tried to find a theme, and I think they've coined insurance, for example, one of the themes. But I'm not sure if that's really more kind of aspiration or if that's the reality. But I mean, we've seen, I think, two well-funded hubs for insurance startups. But I'm not sure if that'll, like in 10 years down the road, we'll say, hey, you know, we've got the biggest insurance tech things because of that. But it's hard to pin down.
Well, we talked about so many good things about Cologne. The location, things that other cities, they can't just have. Yeah. Cologne has some very unique positives. Yeah. So what does Cologne have to do to become more competitive in a sense of technology startups? What's holding Cologne back?
Well, I mean, as always, like there are a couple things which are harder to change. Like, for example, I would say that, as I said, the nature around Cologne. There are better places in Germany, but that's hard to change. I do think Cologne needs to step up its game when it comes to simple public infrastructure, trains, trams.
Oh, really?
Bike paths, like really basic stuff. Like I was in Amsterdam last week, and to see like Dutch cities, how well they have built this type of infrastructure. And that attracts young, smart people. So like my biggest advice to city officials is usually, hey, like don't try to go too deep into startups and try to reinvent the wheel, but provide what the city needs to do, namely really good public infrastructure for people who think sustainably, for people who don't like think, okay, you know, just cars and everything. Yeah. And that does more to startup infrastructure than many other things. So, you know, I would just invest. I just read the other day, I don't know, Utrecht, I think, invests 130 euros per employee per year for bike paths, which is not much. 130 euro per. Yeah. Cologne was €2.90. So that's
drastically different.
That's the stuff where I put money in, because that will attract people, and that's stuff which is within the stuff a city can do. All the rest, private people need to do, and private startups need to do.
I would never have thought about that. Yeah. I know people they moan about the underground, but I thought Cologne was quite well connected. It seems like it's good to get here from a distance. Yeah. But actually the infrastructure when you're inside the city is not.
Fully agree. And that's things we need to work on.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was that. I'm sometimes a tourist, so I love the e-scooters. Yeah. So for me, it's all magical. Yeah. But if you live here, I didn't realize the infrastructure was a problem.
It is. I mean, it's
well, not a problem, but there's so much room for improvement.
Yeah. I mean, public infrastructure, is still better than in many parts of the US, but when we compare it with our next door neighbor, Holland, I think we just need to go. Holland, or also Denmark, I think they're doing some fantastic things. We just need to just copy them. They do it so well, like no need to reinvent the wheel, just
good foundations.
Get good foundations, get more cars out the city, and build on public and biking infrastructure. And the scooters are a good thing. I think we need to give them some room, and not say, hey, first scooter crashes and it's like, oh, scooters are dangerous. I mean, every day, how many cars crash into something in Cologne? It's like dozens.
They are a bit sketchy though. They're they're too fast for the pavements. They're not fast enough for the road.
They've slowed it. It's like when I started it was 20 kilometers. Now it's 18. They're all throttled to 18 kilometers. So I found it by 2.
I found like a small downhill stretch of road in the city, and I was like, how fast can I get this thing? And I did that once, and I was like, I'm not doing that again. So do you get a sense that the city is close to investing in that infrastructure, or have you got a bit of a mountain to climb?
I think not close enough. Okay. Certainly some more room.
The other thing I was wondering about is whether spoken language might have an influence on how many people come here, because Berlin is really English speaking friendly. Yeah. I find Cologne is mostly. I don't speak a lot of German, but a lot of the businesses that I recruit for, they do really put a high priority on finding German speakers. So the candidate pool is significantly smaller. So do you think that may also hinder potential growth?
It definitely does. That's why here at eyeo, we have English as a company language. We have 24 nationalities, and we say, hey, German is always a plus. And of course, it's always, it shows that you're a motivated individual if you learn the language of your host country, no matter where you are in the world, but it's not a must for working here. So for us, it's absolutely not a requirement. And some of the best people we have are either came from somewhere in the world or are even remotely located. We are strong believers also in remote, so we bring people here from time to time, but then they go and live wherever they want to live, and that might be with their family in India, or it could be at the beach in Greece. Nice. Depending on what the circumstances are. At the end, the results count, and that's our philosophy here, and that of course can differentiate you from as an employer.
It does massively.
It is of course somewhat self-serving in a way that, hey, we get probably better people because we get people where other employers say, hey, no, we don't want to have that person. Because he doesn't speak German, and for us, that's of course opening up a lot of possibilities.
Two things that I give advice to when a company says we need someone now, it's urgent, is can you be flexible in the language skills, and can you be flexible in the conditions? And I get knocked back. Well, the answer is no. Way more often than it is yes. Way more often. So much so I sometimes doubt, am I right? So I want to play devil's advocate to you on the remote working, as if the kind of stuff that my clients tell me, is it, it gives people what they want, but how does remote working impact the productivity of your teams?
It's a great question, and to be honest, the last company I ran, Cedo, we had no remote work, and it was frowned upon. And here, because my co-founder, Vladimir, he's also a big fan of remote work himself, I learned to cherish it. But it is a question. I think some people, to your point, some people can work with it really well. If you're self-motivated, if you're self-disciplined, I think remote also needs a lot of discipline, not only for yourself, making the room and the space to work on your own, but also in your exchange. You need proper protocols, you need the right tools, you need right processes. It's much more process driven. And some people can't cope with it, to be honest. And so everybody has to ask, is it right for me? We have a hybrid model for that reason. We have some great people who work on site here because they say, like me, for example, I'm not a remote worker. I like to come into an office. I like to see people over a coffee machine, and I like to be flexible. And sometimes I work from home, and I, of course, travel a lot and stuff, but I like to be physically in an office. And some people are the same, but others are very, very productive if they just sit and can concentrate fully. So, but of course, it's something where you also need to measure results really well and stuff. And I think there's still a big learning curve for us as well.
Yeah.
I think we've mastered some things, but not everything.
How does it affect the company culture?
It affects it in a big time because there are some segments of the company who barely ever see each other on a personal level, and they we do one big summer week every year where for a week or two we really bring everybody in here. Then this is like a bee house here, and we also go do some offsites and stuff, and people tend to be a little bit more introverted who are attracted to that. People tend to be a little more process driven. I've read something really good last week about remote culture, and the essence there was the good thing about a startup when you build remote culture is you build processes which you need anyway once you become bigger, because at some point, think of big companies like Google or Facebook, for example. They don't have remote work, but they of course have hundreds of engineering centers and things over the world. They need to be as process driven, and so you need to build those processes anyway. And why not do it rather earlier than later? So I think that was a very good point that person who was obviously an advocate of remote made there, and that's true. So I think we're more process driven than many other companies. Again, has pros and cons.
Yeah,
like everything.
So if you're a business that doesn't operate any remote at the moment, is it, or how difficult is it to implement and invest in the infrastructure that you need to allow remote working conditions, or how easy is it to build those processes that you're talking about? I think that is difficult. It's really, the tools are one thing. I think that's fairly easy to copy. The culture is the bigger problem. And I'm honest, I'm struggling with that culture sometimes because the colleague to whom I can walk over in the hallway is closer to me than someone I need to ping over an anonymous channel to get a result. And some people are better with that than others. So, but it's a challenge. Would you recommend it though? Overall, pros and cons. Overall pros and cons. Yes, I think I would recommend it. I think it needs to be well thought through. It's also not for every type of department. I think there are some departments which are better suited, especially the ones which need more concentrated work, which tend to have people who are more process driven anyway in their type of work. In their personality structure. So when you think of QA, when you think of very specific development tasks, those people tend to be different type of personality who are good with those things and are disciplined enough and are process driven enough compared to, let's say, sales or HR or other things which are usually a little bit different type of people. So I think it's just dangerous to say it's the holy grail for everything, just as much as it's dangerous to say, no, we don't want anyone to work remotely. And I think a good balance is what we strive for. Nice. I've just seen the time behind your head, by the way. So if you've got stuff to go to and you need to stop now, I have a few more minutes if you like. Good, because I've got a few more questions. 5 or 10 more minutes would be fine. All right, we'll keep it to 5 minutes then, if that's okay with you. I just don't want to keep you for too long. Also, I don't want to get too political, so you don't have to answer questions about the kind of gender gap or diversity. But when we did our white paper or study project, we saw probably one of the most drastic drastically male-led technology communities of any that we've looked at so far in Cologne.
Oh, really?
For certain skills, especially PHP programmers,
okay.
97% were male in Cologne. And I think overall the number is something like 87% male, 13% female.
Yeah.
So
that definitely overlaps with my experience. My former company, so Cedo, we're on PHP as a platform. There certainly was the case. Here we definitely have a few more women, more web technologies, mobile technologies. But it's certainly true. We strive at eyeo particularly. We strive a lot for diversity, diversity in a cultural sense, nationalities, languages, and stuff, but also on male-female balance. It's hard to achieve though, especially in the short run, because you look at computer science. Computer science in Germany, the people who finish, it's definitely much more male driven than, let's say, in medicine or something where many more females graduate. So it's not just something you like. I think it's sometimes wishful thinking that we could have a balance there. 50. It's just not going to be the case. I think it's still important, and I'm very supportive of us doing this here, to strive for somewhat more of a balance, because my experience, both myself when I ran companies, but also in companies I'm seeing advising, is that it always is beneficial to have mixed teams. Also gender-wise, it eliminates blind spots, it eliminates certain frictions where they're just different skill sets, and so I'm generally a big fan, but it's a long way.
We see a lot of campaigns in Berlin around women in tech, companies that are really driving it. It's pivotal in their priorities when they're hiring people. But I agree. I think the problem is not that there's not enough women taking the jobs. There just aren't enough coming through the educational system. They're not interested in it when they're younger. So there's a finite supply of people. Right. And you can't just suddenly, magic a 50-50 gap, 50% male, 50% female.
Absolutely. And it's the opposite in other, like in kindergartens, for example, they strive for the opposite. In kindergartens in Germany, there are big pushes of having more male teachers or kindergartners, and I think it's equally hard. The logic is the same. Little children profit from having both male and female role models, but even there, if they would say, hey, we want to have 50% kindergartners, it'd be a lost battle. And I think it needs to be kind of reflective of the realities. But it's certainly something we strive for as well. We're part of those Women in Tech initiatives wherever we can. We try to do a lot internally, but it's probably going to be a path.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't really have too much else that I can ask you quickly, because we might get off on a tangent and I'll end up keeping you here for another half an hour. I guess the only other question I'd have is if you feel there is a really strong skill gap in Cologne. If you look at the number of vacancies, the demand for technology talent here versus the available people here to do those jobs.
Well, generally there are more open positions than really good qualified people, as everywhere. I can't judge if that's better in other cities or countries than here. Generally, of course, we're always looking for people. There's always the question, of course, on how high do you raise the bar. Of course, we can fill every position, but wanting it to fill with good people and the benchmark we have, that of course is always hard, but I think that's pretty commonplace.
So do you care if you fill a role with someone that lives in Cologne, or if you find that person from outside of Germany, if they can do the job?
Oh yeah, we are absolutely flexible for that. As we are a remote company, we can even just accommodate a lot better for life situations. We like people to spend a certain time with their colleagues here, but if someone, for example, has a family still and then just kind of comes here once a month for a few days, that is more than enough if someone can do the job. And that certainly, everybody tries to have an edge also as an employer. That's certainly one of the edges we're trying to have over our competition in the war for talents.
It will give you an edge. I think there's a perception from international talent that they are kind of more welcomed in somewhere like Berlin. They don't even think to look at what opportunities are available in Cologne. So it's good to hear from someone like you that is not the case. You know, international talent is welcome here. I think there's a massive opportunity for people outside of Germany as well.
Absolutely.
Cologne's such a small place. I don't think there are enough people that can do good jobs here, and more people should relocate. So, I mean, I think that's everything. You've been brilliant, Tim.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming on.
Questions.